Welcome to Sports CTO Talks. In this series, we would be connecting with industry leaders from sports and technology. I am Ami, your guide on this journey through amazing minds of leaders who are shaping the future of sports and technology. We will dive deep into innovations driving the industry, from AI to cloud, from cybersecurity to sustainability. If it is sports tech, we are talking about it. On today's podcast episode, we have a guest, Derek Johnson, with us. He is the founder and CEO of Sherpa. Sherpa is an AI. I hope I have pronounced it correctly.
Yeah, it is.
Sherpa.
It is correct.
Okay.
Yep, yep. Yep.
Sherpa, an AI powered sports intelligence platform redefining how teams and front offices operate. Sherpa serves as AI layer across organizations, helping teams turn fragmented data into real time decisions across scouting, recruiting, contracts, NIL, and financial strategy. DJ brings over a decade of experience in enterprise technology with leadership roles at Microsoft, Apple, Dell, combined with first hand experience as a former football player and a sports agent. He is building Sherpa to become the system of records for sports, where data becomes decision. Today, on this podcast, he would be talking about how AI is redefining decision making in sports front offices. Derek, we welcome you to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. Super excited for this today. Yeah, you guys reached out and I was like, oh, this is perfect opportunity for us to talk globally and just talk about all things sports. So super excited for the conversation today.
Absolutely. So, like, my first question is sports analytics is now at present like around $5 to $6 billion market, expected to cross $23 billion market by 2033, according to reports. Yet, front offices still struggle to turn data into decisions. Where it is, where is the breakdown, and what are the problems? Let's discuss that.
Yeah, I think so I think a little bit about, my background. I always worked in, big technology. So the companies you named, and I was always on our like media, sports and entertainment accounts. And something that I noticed like right on was like it was these teams would spend a lot of money on software, but none of which would integrate with each other. So I feel like banking and healthcare had the same kind of issues, right? Where it was like,
Hmm.
all these like, data silos, fragmented data systems. And then they went through a really, really like hard kind of like a revamp and modernization. I think something that helped the banking industry and also the healthcare industry was like the mandate to like, hey, move some of your stuff to the cloud. It doesn't have to be 100%, but we need some kind of hybrid approach, right? I think sports institutions for so long, and it was one of those things of like, hey, we're gonna buy something that's a one size fits all software. And when you do that, I mean, the good thing is it's simple to use. Not really hard to deploy. So the adoption is really, really fast. But now when you start having teams and organizations asking themselves, well, hey, we get all this data, but what can we actually do with it? How do we leverage it? You got to look at the infrastructure first, right? So I saw an interesting statistic the other day. I was reading a Wall Street Journal article that was talking about talking with front office executives, IT executives that are in sports organizations about infrastructure readiness, right? So for AI, and it was like three different tiers. It was like like good, super critical, or extremely critical, right? So most of them were on that other end of like extremely critical, like that we have to get our infrastructure either re-platform or modernized so we can actually leverage AI and do more with data. So if you look at those numbers we talked about, 600, 6 billion up to like 20 billion. That's what's driving that transformation, right? It's like, there's a lot of money flowing into sports. Obviously, with investments comes potential like ROI and responsibility. So teams are essentially asking themselves now, it's like, well, hey, we're doing all this stuff with data analytics, but how do we actually get more out of it leveraging AI? And that's where Sherpa kind of like came into play at, right? It was like, hey, we know that teams operate differently. Their belief systems are different. Their software should reflect that as well. So that's kind of where we're seeing the transition, and we feel like we're in the right place at the right time.
Okay. Like there is a continuing question to my first one. Like front offices today, when see, are flooded with data. It can be from performances to recruiting to finances. So why are decisions still fragmented? And
Yeah,
as you said, I'm so sorry. And as you said,
yeah.
that there is money flowing in. Then where is the gap and what is the issue happening?
Yeah, I think there's like two things, right? I always, approach things with customers like, you got to be empathetic from the perspective of like they only know what they know, right? So, if you've been doing things for one way for a very long time and it's working, as the old saying goes, if it's broken, don't don't fix it, right? Like, but the second part is, if you don't evolve, as the old saying goes too, you die,
Correct.
right?
Correct.
And I think if you look at that, like you said, like there's all this stuff from health data to performance stuff to recruiting and scouting. Now you got college players that are getting paid. So how do you track 85 contracts from that perspective, right? So it's all these different like data points. And I look back at like one team that I kind of admire. Like I'm a huge baseball guy. I'm a Los Angeles Dodgers fan, but you traditionally, like in baseball, whoever had the most money would always win. But
Correct.
there was an era when the Houston Astros, who were probably, let me say, bootstrapped for cash, they went on a pretty good streak as far as like winning multiple World Series championships, and it was because they really pushed and adopted data analytics along with some AI components as well. And it was rough for them, right? For like the first like 3 years, it was very uncomfortable, right? But that's the part of like change, right? It's like, because they did make that change, they were to become competitive. They won a few championships because of it, and now they're better off because of that change and being forced to kind of do that and look at doing things a different way. I think, front offices for the longest time have been kind of told, well, hey, you can't do that or you shouldn't be doing that. And, our process at Sherpa and the way we look at things is like, well, what if we could actually bring just a little bit of Silicon Valley into sports technology, right?
Correct.
I think one thing that I do admire about, software in Silicon Valley is like nothing is impossible, right? You see where AI was and where it's at now, and then all the things with like the metaverse and all that kind of stuff, right? It's like, who would have thought that that was going to be a thing? So I think, sports tech is going through that same transformation right now. They're just going to need a few folks like Sherpa to be thought leaders in the space, not only with how to leverage AI, but how do we get your infrastructure and your team ready to leverage AI so you're getting the most out of your product? So I think, the team that are early adopters are going to be the ones that are going to win in the long run.
Perfect. So, like in your view, is the real bottleneck data infrastructure, or is it decision making culture inside organizations? Because as you said, it can be many a times bringing the Silicon Valley attitude, or many a times there are companies who go all traditional. So what is the bottleneck here?
Yeah, a lot of it is at the decision level, right? I always, you follow the money, right? If you look at the way teams and organizations have purchased technology for decades, very expensive, very high priced, a lot of investment in man hours into training folks on those tools. So if I'm a decision maker within that sports organization ecosystem, the first thing I'm going to think is like, well, hey, well, why are we making this change now, right? Like, do we need to make this change?
Correct.
So that change management is real, right? And I talk with a lot of different founders about you bringing new technology into sports. That change management is hard because you got people that, I mean, they put their livelihoods on the line to say like, hey, we need this product. This product can help us solve a problem. And now they're trying to come back to someone who potentially gave them budget for that and saying like, well, actually this product that I told you that we needed, not really relevant anymore. And we already put a bunch of money and man hours into it. Like, how do you have that conversation with someone after you were like so adamant about like, hey, we definitely need this older product, right? So I think a lot of it is the decision making process, but I think the other part is the technical like immaturity, right? Like
Hmm.
I think, working in, Silicon Valley with big enterprise companies and then looking at, companies that make a lot of money inside of sports, like the way that they operate from a technical perspective, they're really, really far behind. And it's not just the smaller organizations, even some of the larger organizations.
Correct.
I was talking with my CTO a few days ago, and I'm like, man, you look at the amount of cash that comes into these organizations and institutions, and we're having conversations with CTOs, CIOs, head of scouting, head of player personnel, and seeing some of the stuff that they're using. You would never know that, they're getting a $60 million donation for their program, or they made $2 million in an hour with like fan engagement stuff, right? Because the software doesn't reflect that, right? So
Correct.
we're definitely like having those conversations. We're letting customers know, hey, it's okay that you're not there. And that's where Sherpa steps in. It's like, hey, let us allow us to help you get there to where you need to be and build out a long-term strategy that not only helps you guys make money, but also save money in the long run as well as you guys grow and optimize.
Correct. So, like as you were saying, like there are teams which are making multi-million dollar bets. It can be on recruiting, contracts, and NILs. So, how should front offices think about risk adjustment ROIs? Because when if there is one wrong move, it's going to cost millions. So,
Yeah, that's a great question. I think about it as like diversifying your portfolio, right? This is investment 101, right? So if I'm a team and I'm like, hey, you know what, we have a certain budget that we have to stay under, great. Money you got to spend, you got KPIs and ROI that you want to hit. Um, and this is just me, I could be naive, but the investment strategy is always, hey, you want to diversify your portfolio, right? You never want to have everything sitting in essentially one basket. So you start talking about, ROI and being able to essentially roll up some of those like key performance indicators around like, success and measuring that. It goes back to, what I've seen a lot of successful companies do, which is a hybrid approach, right? I tell everybody all the time, it's like, you should never use one thing as the main source of truth. Now, maybe you have that as your, hey, this is our system that we use as like our main kind of like point of view on things, but you should have some other opinions in your ecosystem, right? And I think that's the beautiful thing. If I've learned one thing in technology, a lot of these major successful companies, they do business with Microsoft, they do business with Google, they do business with AWS, right? And that's what makes them really successful because you're able to kind of pull bits and pieces from each of those companies and pour that back into your company. I think sports organizations have to think that same way, right? It doesn't have to be, hey, we're only going to work with this one company. Diversify that portfolio, and that's where you're going to be able to get a lot of that ROI because you'll actually have an unbiased opinion, and you'll be able to have different options that you're going to be able to bring to the table when you're talking about leadership.
absolutely. So, like, what's the true cost of getting a key decision? It can be right or wrong, not just financially, but it can be in terms of performance, culture, or long-term decisions or long-term values.
Yeah, that's another great question, right? I think about, there's a lot of organizations, they all want to win, right? And it's like, you want to win, you want to do things the right way, you want to be aggressive in your approach. Um, I think that the biggest cost is, not doing anything, right? I see a
Hmm.
lot of like organizations that kind of feel like, well, we don't need to do that, or there's almost like a lack of curiosity there a little bit, where it's like, we'll get to that when we get to that. And I do like truly believe this because I've seen it, firsthand in like other verticals. The early adopters are the ones that, have a lot of the success. I mean, if you look at, a technology example is a good one, which is NVIDIA. If you
Hmm.
look at like IBM and NVIDIA, if you go back, probably like, 10 years ago, NVIDIA and IBM weren't even in the same conversation, right? You would say IBM was here and NVIDIA was really, really, really low.
Yes,
But NVIDIA took a lot of risk on, GPUs and the AI and like kind of revamping what they were doing. And IBM kind of stayed kind of stagnant. Now, NVIDIA is leaps and bounds ahead of them, right? So
absolutely.
that's the cost, right? It's like, well, hey, not saying you got to go unplug everything overnight because that's unrealistic too, but are you evolving? Are you thinking about ways to become more innovative? Are you thinking about changing? Because if you're not and your opponent is, then eventually, just like those big tech companies that were major back in the day, they become dinosaurs, and then eventually, like you got the new kid on the block that's controlling things. So you got to always be pushing that needle towards innovation.
Absolutely. So, like, there are some estimates which suggest that 60 to 70% of organizational data goes unused. Like, there are sports teams facing a similar inefficiency. And what does that mean in competitive advantage, the lost competitive advantage? What does that mean?
Yeah. So it's funny, right? Like, I'm a big technology guy, right? And when I think of like big tech, I always think about like, okay, well, you think of the metas of the world, open AIs, the big time, like innovative digital native companies, right? Something that they do well along with like, Microsoft is they do a lot of integration, right? So if OpenAI goes and buys another product that's going to go into their stack, it's not going to be something that can't be integrated. Because to your point, if you buy something that can't be integrated, now you got data and things that you can't use, right? So one big thing that we looked at early on was like, well, okay, well, hey, we know there's some of these organizations have going back maybe 10, 15, maybe even 20 years of historical data, but you're buying something for $250,000, $500,000 for the year, and you can't even leverage your historical data. So it's like, okay, well, how do we make something where you get the best of both worlds, where you're getting the new stuff, you could bring some of your old stuff. That way, you're not buying something you can't use anything, right? Because then at that point, you almost just kind of taking up space a little bit with some of the stuff that you kind of needed, but then it doesn't integrate with your new product. So we always kind of thought about that early on. It's like, well, hey, how do you continue to evolve in the sports space if everyone's buying the same product and it's not doing anything different, right? And where's that competitive advantage? Our belief is, if you look at soccer, like Manchester United operates different from PSG. Their software should reflect that too, right? There might be things that PSG is looking for from performance and player and scouting at the academy level, that Manchester United is just not going to think about, or maybe they don't want to copy what PSG is doing, right? Now there's always those similarities that kind of run in parallel. But our belief is, with 60% of data not being used, how do we get it to where these teams can actually use some of their own data and leverage it against some of the newer tools that are out there? And that's what Sherpa does really well, right? You literally can bring your own data to our ecosystem and get the most out of it.
Absolutely. So, like, when you are talking data, like we all keep on hearing, like, that there is data driven all the time. But what's the difference between being data rich and being data decision intelligent?
Yeah, yeah. If you think about like, I always think of it like a two-parter, right? It's like, data analytics, I feel like it's always like it's almost like hindsight, right? It's like, oh, we see what we had. Thinking back, we probably should have done X, Y, and Z, right? Think about the intelligence piece. It's like it's proactive, right? It's like, well, hey, here's what we have. Here are some potential outcome and decisions that we can actually make based on the intelligence part, right? And that's kind of where a lot of the connectors come into play, where we do things at, right? It's like, well, hey, what if you don't have to kind of wait to make a decision? What if you had something that kind of like helps you or guides you and informs you on decision making and not after the fact, right? It's kind of like one of those things where you have a friend and you might go through a bad time in your life, and a friend says, "Well, I could have told you that." Well, it's like, "Well, why didn't you tell me that?" So I think a lot more teams are thinking about things that way, right? It's like instead of being like, after the fact on a analytic perspective, you want to essentially be like, okay, well, how can we be proactive with like our approach and what we're going to do? And I mean, at the end of the day, I think the one thing about sports, which is always tried and true, is, how can we help organizations win more games and be successful? That's the bottom line, right? And that's where that intelligence piece comes into play at.
Okay. So, like, when you were talking about analytics, why do most analytic tools stop at dashboards instead of actually influencing decision making in real time?
I think that's just the way it was always done. Like I think it's one of those things, if you look at a lot of the companies that have come to market as of late, a lot of them are trying to push more heavy decisions on the back end for users. But I think most of it back in the day was, hey, you guys are maybe using an Excel spreadsheet or a Google Doc. Let us build something that has a nice dashboard for you to use versus just using that Excel and Google sheet. And it stopped there because that was the only real requirement. I do think the one thing that I do love about sports technology and like the folks that I'm talking with that are thinking about it from a different perspective and a different lens, they're forcing companies to essentially deliver more on a product side, right? So it's not going to be as simple as a simple dashboard anymore. What am I getting inside of that dashboard, right? And I always say, the old saying is like lifting up the hood to see what else is under there. I think a lot more teams are going to be asking, companies that are coming to market with software, well, hey, what else are we getting outside of just a pretty dashboard? Because with AI now, a lot of teams can start building some of that stuff out internally with like vibe coding. So I think, the good thing is they're putting pressure on, legacy vendors and vendors like myself to come to the table with more. And I'm just a firm believer, like, I mean, you start looking at some of these budgets and things that they're paying for. At least in Silicon Valley, there's no world in which you pay, $550,000 a year for a software and all you get is a pretty dashboard. It's just not going to fly. So,
Correct.
one of our saying is like, Silicon Valley meets sports tech, right? And like we're bringing that same belief. It's like, hey, like asking some of those tough questions, like, okay, well, if you could wave a magic wand, what all would you want to get out of your software and your tool? And Sherpa offers that for them, right? It's like, hey, we want to actually kind of be a strategic partner with you and thinking about things not only from the AI perspective, but just technology in general, right? Consolidating things, helping you guys make more money, generate more money, but ultimately going back to the one thing that matters as well, which is the player engagement and player experience, right? So that's kind of one of the fun things that we're seeing in the space at this time as well.
Okay. Can you paint us a picture of what does an AI-enabled GM or an athletic director actually do differently day to day?
Yeah, so now you start talking about like college level stuff, right? I think for the most part, I think like MLB, like, baseball, Premier League soccer, NFL, most of the teams are structured the same way. So, you can kind of look at it and see like, okay, well, hey, we know what to expect on a day-to-day from a GM at the pro level, or, talking with the head of scout or player operations at the pro level. Like most of their days are pretty much structured the same for the most part. Now you got little tweaks here and there, but for the most part, everybody's organized the same way. At the college level, what we've seen is like every school is different.
Correct.
Things that a big school needs is going to be completely different from what a small school needs. And most of the time at the small school, they're wearing multiple hats. So let's
Yes.
start with the small school first. Small school athletic director, they might be responsible for, the financing piece, but they're also responsible for maybe two or three Olympic sports, right? And then you got another deputy athletic director who's responsible for maybe football and basketball, right? So if I'm at that small school, something that I'm going to always ask myself is, well, hey, how can I make my day in life easier, right? How can I get insights and transparency on how budget is being spent, you know, future allocation, and then, player engagement as well, right? Player engagement and recruitment, along with potential like documents and things that we're tracking, right? Like how are we tracking against our numbers, right? So, and then you got multiple sports to worry about, right? Because football is going to operate different from a softball team.
Yes.
But I think the one good thing that we've seen that customers like about our platform is it does provide that transparency level. So that way, that person who's over the Olympic sports teams can also see what's going on the football side of the house. And when that team comes back together, those athletic directors can talk strategically about, okay, well, hey, here's how things are being spent. Here's where we are. Here's what we need to do kind of moving forward, whether it be raising money or essentially surplus, anything like that, right? Things they couldn't really do in the past because the right hand wasn't talking to the left hand. So there's that for the small school. Now, you go to the bigger school. They don't have a money problem. They have more of
Correct.
a communication problem, right? Because you got money flowing
Correct.
in from donors, you got collectives, and then they're really like an enterprise company, right? If you look at like a University of Texas or University of Southern California, USC, like these schools are massive. So their thing is more around just communication. So like, how do we streamline communication in these internal systems, and make sure that, in our department, we're doing what's right to essentially make sure that we're in guidelines with the new rules and things like that. So that's where Sherpa comes into play there. But then also the other parts are talking about ROI. University of Utah, they just got a $500 million investment from private equity. So, in technology, private equity, they're looking for returns 24 months in. So that's another piece that the big schools can actually leverage our platform for. It's like, hey, well, here's where we spent this money. Here's why we spent this money on said player. And then here's essentially how we're planning on spending the money over the next 18 months, to essentially give a nice kind of like ROI return to that private equity and some of the other donors and collectives that they're dealing with. So just kind of like two different use cases. But I think for the longest time, it was always, hey, you buy this software, it should work the same way for the big school that it should for the small school. And that's just not realistic in today's era.
Okay. So, like, where do you see AI agents creating most immediate impact? It can be in scouting, recruiting pipelines, contract decisions, or financial strategy, or it can be something else.
Yeah, I think AI agents is an interesting one. I think a lot of like teams today are using this like they're thinking like ChatGPT is like AI agent. It's like no, AI agent is something that's actually built for your specific needs, right?
Exactly.
So I get excited about it, because it's always cool when a school comes to you and says like, well, hey, here are like just recruiting wise, right? Like here are some of the five things that are important to us in a player and recruiting. Like, can you help us build an AI agent around that, right? Or like, hey, we want to be able to build an AI agent that's going to help us with key dates for payments for a player, right? But then we always take it a step further. It's like, well, great, we'll build you this AI agent, but then we're talking with schools about agentic AI framework, which is how that agent's running in the background, collecting some of that data to help you make better informed decisions. But the good thing is, I feel like, there are a lot of people that are like curious in the space and they want to learn about this stuff. So something that we've been doing a lot of is just around like AI readiness with like our partners at Google, just around like, hey, here's how you should be thinking about AI agents. Very base level, here's what an AI agent is, here's what it could do. And then we start having that conversation around like, what do you want your AI agent to do for your ecosystem? And from there, we just kind of take it off and kind of build out a roadmap around it, around AI agent adoption for that organization.
Okay. Uh, like, why do like it is not a question continuation in with AI, but why do NIL deals now are crossing billions in aggregate value? Why is there still no standardized benchmark for player valuation?
I mean, I think that's like a really good question. I think one of the biggest things that we're seeing in the space is there's no transparency. So there's actually some folks here in the States that are trying to build out a collective bargaining agreement for college athletes. Because at the pro level, you have, the NFL Players Association, you have the NBA Players Association, MLB Players Association, right? And within that association, there's essentially codes of conduct where you have to be transparent about contracts and things like that, right?
Correct.
So I'm a big football guy, so I'll use football as an example here, right? So
Mm.
you think about like a player like Lamar Jackson. He gets a contract that goes over to the NFLPA. Now the market knows essentially, hey, here's what a top quarterback is worth. So whoever's going to be up next should be maybe like $1 more above that, right? To kind of reset the market and so on and so forth, right? That's across all positions, across all sports, right? College doesn't have anything like that yet because
Yes.
it's so new. For the longest time, players in college weren't being paid. So that's where a lot of like what we do comes into play. It's like, okay, well, there's a lot of data out there about top NIL deals and rev share models and things like that. So we work with agents as well that kind of help us integrate and train some of our models around what a player is actually worth in a certain conference or a certain league. And we kind of use that benchmarking to essentially spit some of that data out when we're talking with some of these institutions. That way they have an idea at least around what a player is potentially worth. Now, there's always a caveat to that, right? And I had this conversation with a school the other day. I said, well, market is dictated on the buyer. If I think something
Yes.
is $5 and you think something is $25, the seller is most likely going to go to the person who has the higher bid. So
Correct.
I think that's going to be a work in progress. But I do think as eventually NCAA figures out collective bargaining agreement, things like that, NIL will be probably at the same standards that the pro leagues are at now with that transparency across both the agency side and then the organization side. That way they can actually have line of sight to what market value is for each player in each conference.
Okay. One last question, Derek. Like 3 to 5 years from now, what will define a winning front office and what should leaders start doing to stay ahead?
Man, another good question. um, I, I think, if I look back to the Houston Astros use case, I think something that really did fascinate me about that use case was they didn't know where to start, but they started, right?
They started.
Yeah, I think that the biggest thing is, and I guess it's always easier said than done because you're talking about people's livelihood and there's budget restrictions, all that kind of stuff, right? I think the front office that are going to be successful tomorrow are going to be the ones that are actually being intentional about the new wave that's coming, right? Which is AI and the thinking about different ways that they're buying software and starting today, right? Even if it's a workshop that you're taking to make sure that all of your the department is enabled on AI technology. Maybe potentially bringing in a consultant to look at different ways you guys could be leveraging it, right? But if you fast forward 3 to 5 years, I think the same way that data analytics kind of hit the sports market, AI is going to have that same effect, right? And it's going to be a delayed effect, right? Because you look at all the use cases around data analytics, and it was like data analytics is it's not real. You can't use it. And now you can't watch a game without them talking about the data analytics and decision
Correct.
making, right? It's front and center. So I feel like AI is going to be that same way within the sports ecosystem. So start now. Don't be scared, and just the teams that are curious are going to be the ones that are going to essentially be able to evolve and win over time.
Absolutely perfect. Derek, we'll move on to the next segment of the podcast. That's the rapid fire round. I'll
Okay.
ask you a few questions and you'll have to be very quick in answering. It can
Okay. I'll
be
try
either
to
one word
be.
or one sentence max.
Okay.
Okay, perfect. Who is your favorite player of all time?
Kobe Bryant,
Okay. NIL, opportunity or chaos?
opportunity.
If you could fix one broken thing in front office overnight, what would it be?
Software consolidation.
Mm. One word to describe the future of sports decision making.
Opportunistic.
Okay. Nice one. Dashboard or decision engine.
Decision engine.
If AI could replace one task in front office tomorrow, what should it be?
Communications.
Okay, perfect. We'll move on to the next segment. There is one question which you will have to answer in 30 seconds. That
Okay.
is, what is the role of AI and how is AI redefining decision making in front office?
Yeah. So I look at it as an opportunity for schools and teams to get better. If you look at it as it pertains to front office, it's like, how do you go a step further, right? If you look at teams in the past, everybody has kind of used the same tools to try to get ahead. But this should be essentially ingrained to your like workflow, right? Whether it be financial,
Correct.
recruiting, performance, like AI should be ingrained in that human loop feedback that all these organizations are working with. That way, as they move forward, it becomes not so much of a nice to have, but a necessity because it's ingrained into their ecosystem and decision-making processes.
Thank you, Derek, for the amazing insights on the podcast and joining us today.
Of course. All right. Thank you guys for having me. Definitely appreciate it.
So, everyone, please share this episode with all the people who love sports and technology. We will meet in the next episode next week. Until then, stay curious, stay inspired, and keep exploring.